Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is BestInSlot, and we are finally back reading a little bit more of my in-progress dinosaur novel, The Crimson Jungle. Now, to quickly explain why it's been about 3 weeks, I think, since we last did a video. Basically, I've had a very rough 3 weeks. Personally, I've not really had the time or the sort of desire to write, so I've really done nothing past the chapter I just finished, which is actually chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a substantially longer chapter than every other chapter in the book so far, so it did take a little while. So I didn't really feel up for it, and when I don't feel like writing, I don't also feel like reading out the writing, because eventually you guys would catch up and it would all fall apart, basically. But things are going a lot better, feeling pretty good, ready to sort of get back into it, and so I'm ready to start reading it as well. Now, today we're going to do chapter 4. Before we get started, I should say, so what happened in the last chapter, in case you forgot, because it has been a little while, Noah and the gang, as they shall now be known, have landed in Brazil. The Chinook just arrived. That's going to carry them over to their destination point in the Amazon jungle, where they're then going to head off towards the lab, etc., etc. So they just got onto the Chinook at the end of the last chapter. As the helicopter soared over the never-ending sea of rainforest below, Professor Richardson explained what he knew about the ecological reserve they were travelling to. "De-evolution, that's your game, right, son?" he asked, continuing before Noah could barely nod his head. Right. Exciting stuff indeed. From what I hear from Clara, which isn't much, is it? They've been experimenting with de-evolution for a long time out in this reserve. A quiet spot with the right kind of environment, and somewhere nobody's going to ask too many questions. All very hush-hush. Anyway, the burly man lowered his voice to what must have counted as a whisper for him, though it still drowned out the throbbing whirl of the helicopter rotor just above their heads. Anyway, in the last few years, somebody had the idea to use viruses to prompt rapid and spontaneous genetic mutation during the embryo development. Nasty stuff, son. Nasty. Viruses that if the CDC knew about, they'd be firebombing the entire bloody jungle to get rid of. That's why I'm here. Safe extraction of the viruses, you see. Stop them infecting any of you luckless bastards. The large man guffawed and nudged the silent Gwyn next to him, almost sending the poor girl flying out of her chair. The professor turned back to Noah and knelt in closer, his tangled beard almost brushing the stubble on Noah's chin as he dropped his voice to a timbre Noah didn't know the man was capable of. "Keep your wits about you down there, my boy," Richardson continued. "I'm not sure they're telling us everything we need to know. You hear me?" Noah nodded, but in truth he didn't really process the words. He was focused on the idea of viral mutation. It wasn't unheard of course. It happened in the natural world constantly. Viruses known as retroviruses can latch onto a host cell and insert their own genetic material into it, thus sparking rapid mutation that then gets transferred onto every cell in that cell's future lineage. Given a high efficacy on the virus and a weak host such as an embryo, it's possible that spontaneous mutation would occur at a fairly alarming rate. But, despite what horror films may have had us believe, this isn't going to result in mutated new limbs and the like, but instead would almost inevitably end with an aggressive cancer, and soon after, death. So how could they use a virus to mutate an embryo in such a way it would revert to the form of its ancestors? How could the mutations in multiple cells all work in unison to create new but prehistoric structures? It seemed impossible. It was impossible. Even Noah knew that, and he was no virologist or geneticist. And if Noah knew it, that meant Richardson knew it as well. If Clara was telling the truth and there were real living dinosaurs down there in the reserve, then somebody wasn't giving him all the facts. Noah closed his eyes and leaned back against the warm metal hull of the Chinook, allowing the repetitive throb of the rotor blades and the pervasive scent of gasoline to drown out his concerned thoughts and distract from the ever-present pulsing at the back of his eye sockets, a familiar companion of exhaustion. As he'd guessed, the helicopter was a military vehicle. The inside had that bare-bones, budget-saving feel to it that often accompanies service helicopters. It was nothing more than 2 rows of tattered old leather seats and a corrugated steel walkway between the two. Spindly straps of beige fabric crisscrossed over the steel walkway down to the drawbridge-style opening at the back end of the vehicle, and Noah could see old scuff marks embedded into the metal, as though something large had been strapped down there during its surface days. Further up from where the 3 scientists sat, there was a closed-off pilot's cabin, the door of which was marked with a spray-painted crown, lion and swords, the traditional symbol for the British Army. Clara had locked herself into the cabin early into their voyage and not emerged since. Noah wondered if she hadn't been giving him all the information, or if she hadn't been given it herself. The professor and young Gwyn were deep in conversation by the time Noah opened his eyes once more, so instead he turned his attention to the perspex window beside him, and the view that stretched out for what seemed like an eternity. He knew at heart that down there, lurking between the trees, was one of the most inhospitable environments you could face, a barely breachable mass of vines and undergrowth filled with hungry beasts, both large and small, ferocious and poisonous. But from up here, it was beautiful. A pristine emerald cloak laid down upon every inch of earth below them, broken only by the delicate streaks of dark river that carved their meandering paths through the forest. The canopy seemed never-ending. It lasted as far as the eye could see, no matter which direction one chose to look, and Noah could even see it bend with the curvature of the earth. It was an awe-inspiring sight, and one that was worth keeping record of, so Noah reached into the rucksack tucked between his legs and pulled out his Nikon DSLR camera. It was not a new model, at least a decade old now, but it had accompanied him on many a dig site and not failed him yet, though this trip was sure to be its biggest challenge. He let his fingers curve over the pebbled black facade and slipped off the lens covering, pointing the exposed glass towards the perspex window. The camera clicked satisfyingly with each press of the shutter as Noah railed off a dozen or so photos, zooming in and out to capture glimpses of river bends or jungle clearings. Once satisfied, he capped the lens and flicked through the photos via the cracked LCD screen that sat at the back end of the camera. They were all essentially identical. The cloudless turquoise sky and dense expanse of trees were beautiful to look at, but didn't offer much variation from this high up. Only the final photo broke the pattern. Noah spotted a clearing towards the bottom right of the picture. It must have only just become visible as he took the last shot. He rolled his thumb along the wheel at the top of the screen, and the clearing grew larger. A village became visible in its centre, a small gaggle of brown buildings centred around a statue of sorts. Nothing he could make out from this distance. Zooming into the camera's maximum, Noah began to make out specks of black amongst the buildings, and besides the river that curled around the village outskirts, the villagers themselves going about their daily lives. He could see some rigging up a boat with nets as they prepared for a day of fishing, and others toiling away in a tilled field. Some appeared to be kneeling beside a ring of fire that encircled the statue in the village centre, a tall wooden totem intricately carved and much taller than any other building in the entire village. The cabin door swung open and Clara rapped her knuckles on the steel. "Landing now," she shouted above the helicopter drone before turning back into the cabin. Noah felt a shift in the momentum of the vehicle as it halted mid-air, causing the walkway straps to flail about in protest. The Chinook began to slowly descend towards the village that Noah had been observing just moments prior, and as it did, the three scientists pressed their faces to the concave windows in curiosity. Noah could hear the professor and Gwyn talk excitedly beside him as they pointed out the wooden stilted shanty buildings, the racks of smoked jungle fish that cooked slowly over roaring fires, and the villagers who eyed their noisy intrusion with a mix of wariness and wonder. Noah, though, he didn't notice any of that. As the helicopter came to a rest in an empty spot at the top end of the village and the rotor blades finally stopped spinning, he was focused on only one thing: the totem that rose monolithic before him. Into the dark wood was carved many different patterns and creatures, thin draped swirls that coalesced into roaring rivers, the bared teeth of ferocious jungle cats, and a mass of tiny indentations in a myriad of shapes to represent the eclectic combination of beetles and insects that dominated the jungle. Towards the top of the totem, however, the pattern stopped, and instead the wood jutted outwards into a larger shape, a head that was far bigger than that of any other carved beast, one that gazed out across the entire expanse of the village below it. Between the slanted reptilian eyes, rows of curved pointed teeth, and cloak of intricately etched feathers that dropped down from the back of its jaw, Noah knew it could be one thing, and one thing only: a tyrannosaur. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, please consider smashing that like button down below. It really helps me out. And also hitting the subscribe button if you want to be kept up to date with brand new videos about dinosaurs, animals, aliens, and everything else we do here on the BestInSlot channel. All of you who have subscribed so far, that's awesome. Make sure you hit that little bell icon. I'll highlight it now, otherwise you may actually miss out on the content anyway, because YouTube is silly. Thank you guys so much. Much love.